Thanks, Pete.
Before I open up the hearing for the Barnstable Conservation Commission, I would like to ask George to do a roll call for the quorum purpose.
Sam Poo. Sam Poo?
Unmute yourself.
Present.
I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Moran?
Present.
Lee?
Present.
Hearn?
Present.
Abadili?
Present.
Foster?
Present.
Gilmore present. Administrator Darcy Carley?
Present.
Staff member Kim Kavanaugh?
Present.
We have a quorum and our staff is here. We're all set to go, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Acting under the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, and or Chapter 237 of the Code of the Town of Barnstable, the Barnstable Conservation Commission will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, February the 14th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. for the application of Bayano Club, Stephanie J. Gaskell, Trustee, Barley Neck Trust, Janet Holian, Trustee, Holian Family Realty Trust, Deborah O'Rourke, McGregor's Burial. The hearing will be held remotely as televised on Channel 18. The plans and application are on file and may be reviewed by scheduling appointments by sending email requests to Darcy Curley at 230 South Street, Hyannis. This meeting is being recorded and transmitted by the Information Technology Department of the Town of Barnstable on Channel 18. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, anyone else desiring to make such a recording or transmissions, please select Channel 18 or I know. Hearing none. This evening's hearing agenda is posted on the town's website. On the agenda next to each application is the amount owed to the Town of Barnstable for the cost of advertisement. Please send your checks to Conservation Divisions at 230 South Street before the hearing. Remote participations. The Conservation Commission's public hearing will be held by remote participation as a result of an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed up by the Lieutenant Governor on July 16, 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. Remote public access to this hearing shall be provided in the following manner. 1, the hearing will be televised via Channel 18. Second, the real-time public comment can be addressed to the Conservation Commission utilizing the Zoom link 810-2483-1075 or use the toll-free phone number 888-479-4499 as shown on the agenda. Third, the public can also email their comment to darcy.curley@town.barnstable.ma.us at least 8 hours prior to the hearing. For your information, the second NOI tonight, Stephanie J. Gaskell's Trustee, Barley Lane Neck Trust, has requested for a continuance without testimony to February 28, 2023. And for the first continuance tonight, Christian Camp Meeting Association also has request for a continuance to June 6, 2023. We have 5 NOI tonight and no RDA. The first one is Vinyl Clubs to permit seasonal tent timber walkway and ADA access and grading at 107 Seaway Avenue, Austerville, as shown on the Assessors Map 162, parcel 024. John?
Good evening, everyone. John O'Day from Sullivan Engineering Consulting. Also here this evening in the meeting room is Mark Krebs, who is the general manager on behalf of the Vinyl Club. Share my screen with you. I think the commissioners are all very familiar with this project site on Seaview Avenue. This is approximately 4 acres. It's the main property of the Weano Club that has the clubhouse building and some accessory buildings heading off to the east, to the main beach area. We've had some recent projects down on the beach, some revetment and growing repairs, beach nourishment, etc. Probably within the last 5 years or so. More on the upland side of things, there was an addition at the east end of the building, which is called the Sea View Room. That was probably 25 years ago. And in 2014, this is a photo from 2001, aerial from 2001. In 2014, there was a notice of intent and an order of conditions that allowed a deck area wrapping around this sea view room at the east end of the building. That was a notable filing for this commission, in that at the time the commission found that this was a mitigation constrained site. That is a tool in the commission's toolbox that is used very rarely. I think we've only had it encountered twice in all of our years in projects before the commission. But to walk you through the project that we're here for this evening, this began probably in the late fall, where the general manager reached out to the conservation staff to talk about an issue that they were having down at the west end of the building. This is kind of the main ballroom, and there are egress doors out of both faces of this wing. And those doors, on top of just needing to have some maintenance work to them, the egress out of that is not currently code compliant. It's not currently ADA compliant. So they were exploring the idea of creating a timber walkway that would be kind of level with the floor, that would get people safely out of all of those doors. And I'll bring up our plan momentarily. At that time, the tent on the west end of the building, again, this is a 2001 aerial, had recently been removed for the summer, but I think that staff was somewhat surprised at how long the tent had been left up at this point of time. The tents have historically been set up at that end of the building for many years. If I mentioned, I think the club is around 110 years old. The building itself is 140 some odd years old, and that 140-year-old building replaced some other even more grand hotel that had been there long back into the 1800s. So at this end of the building, there's a kind of level on. They historically set up tents in it, and possibly more in history, it was, there would be one function one weekend, and a tent would get it set up on Thursday-ish and taken down Tuesday, and then the next people would come in for Thursday and set up their tent for the next weekend. And it was essentially there all the time, but tent came, tent went every week. During COVID, the club decided, especially when the building itself was closed for a portion of it, that they would erect this tent and just take responsibility of it themselves and have it set up for the entire season, and people could use it for their functions. And so I think that that's now gone on for the last 2 or 3 years, but staff thought that this is an area that perhaps should be subject to an order of conditions, and that's when we became involved. And I think that they suggested that we might look for ways to improve the situation in any way that we could. So switching to our plan, again, the resources that we're dealing with here is a coastal bank. This is a non-eroding coastal bank. It is armored. It's recently revetment been repaired. And so our work is located within the buffer zone to that. The tent area, I guess, starting with, since we were just looking at on the plan, what we have done on this proposed plan is actually pulled the tent landward about 20 or 30 feet from where it had been set up in that photo, and even where it had been set up this past summer based on the grass lines out there. And in doing that, we were able to get it outside of the 50-foot buffer. We're also proposing some drainage around the edges of it. The lawn is nearly completely level here. It is certainly not pitching towards the bank at all. And there is no runoff, signs of any runoff, erosion, drainage concerns heading in that direction. If anything, it's probably heading towards Seaview Avenue, but we did come up with some very minor grading around this so that we could get the water off of the roof and into a drainage trenches around the perimeter of it. On the walkway itself, if I zoom in here just so you can see it a little bit better, again, there are doors along both this western face and southern face of the building. And so this walkway is meant to serve all of those. There are no doors currently along this face. This is the end of the building, is the bandstand, I guess you'd say. So there is not room to maybe think about trying to relocate every single one of these doors. And again, this is a historic structure. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So we're certainly trying to keep any alterations to it towards the rear of the building. Unrelated to this end, but while we were filing a notice of intent, at the other end of the building, we have some minor grading proposed. There's a snack bar here. They set up tables and chairs for the beach users or whoever else may be using the grounds during the season. And so this was just to try to make that area a little bit more level for the tables that they have set up there. Again, we're in the buffer zone to the coastal bank. It's not eroding. No signs of any runoff from this. All work is just buffer zone. No sign of any impact on the wetland resources or the buffer zone. We're not in one of our estuaries, which is impaired, where there may be some additional buffer zone concerns, let's say, very unique, in that the commission has previously accepted that this is a mitigation constrained property, probably taking some consideration into the long history of it and the numbers of people that use this. I think there's 400 plus somewhat full family memberships that are pretty regularly using this property. So there is limited area when we're talking about those numbers. I think with that, I would turn it back to the commission, and we are here to answer any questions that we can.
Before I open up to the commissioner, I have a quick question. At the back end of the proposed timber walkway there, what is the width in there?
The walkway went out 2 feet past the end of the building. I can check the scale. I think it's about 12 feet across here, but I can work on confirming that.
Okay. Louise?
Okay, John, unless I'm mistaken, it appears that you haven't added something for the area of the tent in your mitigation calculations. Am I correct?
You are correct in that. It's our position that is a seasonal structure, and it has been there historically, so we would not expect that it would have required mitigation.
Well, what does historical mean? I mean, what length of time makes it historical?
I, I could not, I'm sure we could look into when the first weddings had been on that lawn, but I think long before any of us have been on Cape Cod,
That the tent has been there?
that area has been used for tents, yes.
Constantly? Not taken up and put back, et cetera, for, you know, a wedding or a single event? Isn't it more recent that it's been just left up and used?
It is more recent, it's within the last 3 years or so that it was left up for the season.
Mhm.
But in my opinion, having an office right around the corner and pretty regularly working on that street, as I said, I think in the many, many years before that, there was events, I would guess almost every weekend at that club, if not more than one, where a tent went up and then a tent went down, and then 2 days later, the next tent went up.
Well, I mean, these tents are blocking growth. I know that when I was there, I saw turf had been put down, but nothing is going to grow there with a tent. By seasonal, how many months are you talking?
Mark could probably tell us the exact dates that the town allows for the tent, but I think in general it's May through November, October.
Yeah,
Okay,
usually early October.
so that's 5 or 6 months. It's half a year. That's a sizable area within our jurisdiction, and that concerns me. The other thing is, I'm wondering in terms of your proposed walkway, which is in both the 50 and the 100, if it couldn't be flipped so that it's on the other face of the ballroom, or reconfigured, actually, would have to be a little bit, but to get it out of our 50-foot buffer.
That's something that we could look at if we had to. Again, this is the face that the doors are on, so I don't think that we could relocate all of those doors, but we could certainly look at the dimensions of that.
Well, you know, we're talking about our 50-foot buffer, and it's a small incursion, but there are several incursions in our 50-foot buffer already on this property, and I fully appreciate the historical significance of the property and the significance to all the members of the Wiano Club. But I think we need to look hard at incursions into the 50-foot buffer, and I would hate to see them continue. So at this end of your proposal, I am very concerned about approving something, the area of that tent, without some mitigation. And I think there must be some room on this property, which is still got some empty space on it for mitigation. At the other end, and you're talking about regrading, can we see the
Yes.
property, the other end? It looks like you're going to end up with a pretty steep slope that's sort of right above the ramp.
Yes, that will be.
Are you concerned about people falling down the slope? Do you need a fence or something to avoid that?
I don't think that we're concerned about that. I think that could be maybe landscaped to deter people from trying to walk over it, but I don't think that was of great concern to the club at this point.
Okay, and this is going to be all lawn. It's not going to have a patio surface on it or anything.
That's all grass, stays grass.
Okay, so again, my concern is the area not being mitigated for on the tent, and also the position of the the walkway? Can we do something different to avoid incursion into the 50 and maybe even get it out of the 100? So thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Larry?
Thank you. I had to get myself unmuted. In asking questions, John, if Mark has some comments about it, I would value what he had to say. Let's talk about the timber walkway first. Is there any slope coming away from the building towards the top of the bank, or is it substantially level?
It's definitely substantially level. There is a more than step out of the existing doors today is part of probably what makes it not, on top of not ADA compliant, not code compliant. It's really more than a 7-inch step out of that building, but the lawn itself is level.
Do you contemplate the walkway being almost flush with the threshold of the doors as they come out, or is it going to come down a little bit less than 7 inches?
My understanding is that that would be essentially level with the floor.
Yep.
Okay, and there are probably at some point it might be helpful to make a notation on here as to where the doors are. There are 2 or 3 doors along this wall.
So there's currently
There's
maybe
some
4
along
or
the
5
western.
French doors that are falling apart. So we're replacing that with 3 large sliding doors.
Oh, okay.
So 12-foot sliders, which leaves a 6-foot opening on each one.
Okay. So the door that goes, the one that goes on the western facing side, the north-south one, that's going to come out. The French doors are going to be blocked over maybe with a window, and then you're
Oh
going
no,
to
the French doors are turning into sliding doors.
well, there'll be a sliding door there also.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So the reason I'm asking that is that John pointed out that at the far end of the building, along here before you get to the tent, there is no doorway there, and there's no room for a doorway. Is that correct?
On the very west end of the building
Yes.
is currently a stage and some storage.
So there is no door out that end of the building.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And is the distance, let's say, John, for discussion purposes, is 12 feet. It could be 10, it could be 14, whatever it is. Is there a particular minimum width that you find would be needed or desired? And the second question is, would people be able to step from this walkway right onto the lawn, or would that be elevated above it?
I think that they could certainly step down that 7 inches towards the lawn if they wanted that direct access. And again, this end of the building, I think, would be more of a ramp to ADA get you down to the lawn level.
Okay.
The doors, I went and looked today, and I know that, you know, give or take a couple of inches, the door goes all the way along this western face. But we can, you know, if we had to, we could certainly look at the configuration of this deck. I don't see us removing the doors on this face of the building and trying to put the deck along Seaview Ave for that access way, but we could certainly take a look at the overall configuration of that walkway.
Well, as I understand it, the rationale behind it is not necessarily linked to the tent. It's linked for the ability for people to step out of those doorways to the outside and then to go around the corner and go down a ramp to get on the building back out to Seaview Avenue that way. Is that fair, or is the purpose of the ramp to gain movement from the main ballroom to the tent?
It's both.
Okay.
Most events, and you'll note that rarely will there be any sort of portable restrooms or anything outside for the tent. So all of the members and guests that are coming into the building come in along that walkway to use the restrooms. Typically, the cocktail hour portion of their event will be on the lawn and in the ballroom. We also, all of our service staff that come in and out of the building that service the tent need to use that access as well. If the entire event is outside and in the ballroom, in the tent, we'll actually do plate up in the ballroom. So it's constant trays going back and forth. So it would just overall improve dramatically the access for members, guests, and staff.
Has that situation been the coming and going of the staff as well as the guests coming and going, whether for shelter or for restroom access, has that been going on as part of the use of the tent continuously? Is it sort of just something that is going to go on regardless regardless of the tent that's there? Is that going to continue at the same volume and impact on the soil, on the surface?
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
because like the temporary tents, if they're going up for 3 or 4 days, we're still servicing them the same way. We're still getting members and guests are all still flowing out that same way.
Okay.
As well as the food service.
Now, how long have you been involved with this project of tent up, tent down, sort of? How many years have you been familiar with it?
Two seasons. I started 2 years ago.
You're a rookie.
That's right.
All right. So my question then really is what is the impact and the method by which the tent is raised and lowered? It seems to me that, I don't know, are the tents, every time the tent's replaced, is it essentially the same tent, or is it something different each time?
It can change. I know historically, traditionally, the club didn't get involved in renting the tents for the private parties, right? The weddings, the big anniversaries. The club would rent a large tent for that space 3 or 4 times a year for certain big, large club events, right? That all the members come to. But it was up to the individual hosts of the event to purchase or rent, pay for the tent, have it put up, have it come down. So the tents could vary a little bit, but most of them are about that same size and same scope. And so when we, just real quick, when I started and in the middle of COVID, we said, well, we can only do events for up to 10 people indoors was the current restrictions. We said, we got to put up something where we can host all of our club events, and then any wedding that wants to use it can, rent it through us essentially. And it was a huge hit, and all the members loved it for everything. And all of the weddings used it as well. So instead of each wedding putting one up, taking it down, putting it up, taking it down, we had an option to keep it up there.
Well, let's assume that that's by far the better way of doing it. And by that, I mean, Louise brought the question up that somehow this covering was going to impact the grass underneath it or impact whatever's here. And yet John has pointed out that he wants to trench it along here to keep rainwater away from the tent and in control. In your 2 years experience, have you seen a significant adverse impact on the grass itself or on anything else in the area? And the second part is, I know it's already been said that you resodded at some point in time. So can you give us a sort of a scenario as to, let's say from May to October, what happens during that time period, and is there any effect on the grass or the lawn or the natural environments around here that we should be addressing?
I think if I can jump in for just 1 second, I mean, clearly grass underneath the tent structure itself that's left up dies over that period of time. I think that, maybe the bigger question to Mark would be, outside of the immediate footprint of the tent, was there any sign of disturbance to the areas, outside of that footprint itself?
Well, I think that's a good rephrasing of the question. Thanks, John, for helping me with that. So go ahead, Mark, and see how you can elaborate on that for us.
Yeah, outside of the actual footprint of the tent, I'd say minimum to none normal foot traffic that would be there regardless because people are out on that lawn all the time. So outside of, this past summer was light in precipitation. So we try to keep things green, but everything kind of browned up and, throughout the property. But 2 summers ago, the first year we had it up for the entire summer, we had a lot of rain. It was a really rainy season, and there wasn't a single time there was any standing water or washout areas or, occasionally some water gets under the tent, but no, the grounds around the footprint of the tent, I'd say minimum to none.
Are you gonna
Okay.
say, Larry?
I've got another question, but I've forgotten what it was. I'll come back later. I'll defer now to other commissioners who, Bill has his hands up. So if I come up with another question, I'll put my hand up and get asked and answered. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you, Larry. Bill?
Okay, coming into this meeting, I was sort of taking Louise's position. I was thinking, I was concerned about the encroachment on the buffer area. And I thought, I get that, it's nice to be able to have a big tent sitting right on the water. But again, the entire building is really taking up a lot of space there in the buffer. And I'm thinking, geez, you need to take the last bit of land and put up a tent permanently. And I was concerned, but then I thought, John, you did a really good job summarizing the history. And it's like, well, you have a tent that goes up, tent goes down, tent goes up, tent goes down. It's like, why don't you leave it up? So I was, I was feeling kind of, I am undecided, but I do have 3 questions. And one is kind of going along the lines of where Larry was going. And I would phrase it this way: did grass continually grow prior to the pandemic? In other words, John, you just stated that, during the pandemic, you put the thing up all season and everything's going to die. It's going to shade, obviously. But prior to the pandemic, when you were going up and down, what was going on with the lawn? That's one question that I have. Second question is, and maybe I'm missing it, you may have said it, this tent is being taken down in October or thereabouts, right? That's, when is it being taken down? My third question is, why can't the tent be moved across the street? I guess that's not as nice as having the tent sitting right on the water, right there. But I mean, can't the tent be moved across the street? Those are my 3 questions. And again, I am really undecided.
So I can try to touch on some of those briefly. I don't, again, when this came down this year, and I don't know if they had to do it last year or not, but the club made the decision, even though they were closed and no one was going to use it and they weren't going to see it, they made the decision to resod that area just so that it wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't a mud puddle over the course of the winter. In the years prior to the pandemic, I couldn't tell you that they had to do, a wholesale resodding of that area, but I do have to assume that they have full-time grounds crew. I'm sure there were areas of sod that were replaced and things that were seeded, and someone constantly, working towards keeping that alive. And I bet it was a struggle, because if the tent started going up on Thursday and down on Tuesday, there was maybe 2 days of light that, barely kept something going there. But and we can certainly look into that. As Mark said, he's only been there 2 years. I know that the head of the grounds is probably around that same time, but we could certainly talk to some of the, members or some of the, employees there to get more information on that. I don't know that there is an area of that size across the street or elsewhere on this property that would be, you know, level and usable, you know, the way that this spot is.
I don't think there is at all, actually. Right across the street is our staff dorm building.
And that building is just, you know, 20 or 30. That's right in here. Sorry. And then there's like 3 or 4 cottages here. Although they may have, you know, 200 acres in this little village, they're pretty well used. And I'm sorry, there was a third part of that question that.
When is the tent removed? Will be removed.
Oh, what was the date again, Mark?
It varies just based on when the last wedding or last large event is booked with us, but the latest it could be is prior to Columbus Day weekend, early October, before October 10th. This year, I think it came down at the end of September or maybe October 1st.
Mark, in your presentations, what time that you are planning to put up the tent? Sometime in May?
Early May. Sometimes it depends on the tent company's schedule too. And if it's going up for the season and they say, we can get out there at the end of April and put it up, you know, we would say, okay. But prior to our first events that start in May.
So for the sake of argument, say right now, you're basically is from May to end of September, technically.
And I would say close. Now I'm trying to remember if it went up. It might have went up like June 1st this past season because we didn't have any events prior to Memorial Day weekend. We open in the middle. We open essentially the weekend before Memorial Day weekend, so it's really more of an end of May, early June install.
Okay, call it for Memorial Day.
Yep.
To the end of September.
Yep.
Almost like an irrigation season to me.
Right.
So the other piece of the information I want to mention it. I think, you know, before COVID, you put up the tent for a couple of days, so you take it down and then you put it up again. So periodically you're moving the tents, installing it and removing it. Now you are asking and see if you can use the tent almost 4 or 5 months per year. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay. The other things that the concern would be like, you know, what happened to the grass underneath it for that 4 or 5 months, they will be died, period. And no matter what you do. And so whether you can, you know, do some grass seeding and stuff like that when the tent is off, but that would be in the winter season. So you're not going to do anything in terms of growing the grass stuff. It's kind of tough. That's my initial perceptions right now. I would prefer you go and look at the, you know, the egress area. If you can narrow it down from, let's say, 12 down to 8 or something outside of the 50, I think that would be a better option from our standpoints. I think that's all my quick comment because what happened is during the COVID, a lot of the restaurants had been trying to use the outdoor seating versus the inside seating because of the bit space, distance, and stuff like that. You know, I learned about that stuff from Board of Health, but that's not in our purview, so I don't want to go there. But I know why you're doing it and what's the reason of you doing it. So, Peter.
Yes, thank you. Well, so yeah, I was at a big wedding, I think it was last summer or whatever, and huge weddings underneath a big tent like that. If it's up a couple weeks in a row, you're going to have a wood floor there. I mean, you're not going to have a dirt. You're not going to have dirt. You're going to put down a wood floor 3 to 4 inches off the current ground so that it'll take the kind of traffic that a permanent, and I'm going to call it a permanent tent because for the functioning of your facility, it's permanent. It's a large expansion of impervious area within our 100 feet. So any rain carrying nutrients, which it does, landing on the rooftop of the permanent tent is not going to be absorbed by any kind of grass or vegetation underneath. So I think it is all the more important if we as a commission permit this to augment between the tent and the sea wall a more vigorous plant community that could uptake and incorporate nutrients and or silt, because when you take that tent down, it's going to be dirt. And maybe I guess you just can roll sod on it, but I'm a little worried about not having a viable plant cover over such a large area. And I also agree that between your ramp and the ramp, you got that's hardwood, people walking on it. But going back and forth, you're going to create a dirt path, which you're going to probably put again a wood flooring over between the ramp and the tent. There's no way that's going to stay grass. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pete. John?
Thank you, Tom. Listening to everybody, there is a history here that we have to recognize, John, as you pointed out. However, I think there are a couple of points that concern me. I think you are going with, quote, a permanent structure, which I assume, Mark, would have a hardwood floor in it. Ladies with heels, et cetera, aren't going to want to walk in grass. So I assume there's a hardwood floor. So I think Peter raised a very good point about that. So I'm going back to Louise's initial comments, and I tend to agree, John, and disagree with you that this, to me, would require a mitigation calculation because it is, quote, a permanent tent for at least 5 months out of the year. Secondly, I go back to the west, I guess it's the east side, where you're going to do that grading, and you look at the elevations, and there's clearly some kind of a bank there. Rather than put a fence up or anything else, that's a wonderful place to put mitigation plantings. So I would think that, although I'm sort of stuck with that earlier decision that it's a mitigation, well, maybe I'm not stuck with the earlier decision that it's mitigation constrained. I suspect it's only partially mitigation constrained. So I think you need to go back and look at putting mitigation certainly on that bank on the east side where you're going to do the landscaping. And I absolutely agree with Peter that any mitigation that can be put between the tent and the seawall, whatever it is that you could put in there, take the grass out of there and put plants in there as part of your mitigation. So I think that those two issues are really critical in my opinion.
Thanks, John. George?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. But John, you do have you're going to be collecting this water, this runoff, and you're going to be putting it in a French drain. Is that right?
Yes, the idea is almost like what they had done on the golf course drainage, where they put in like they call it like a slit drain. Sorry, I can pan up here. They ran them all around the golf course with slit drain, so it's barely visible in the grass. It's not like a trench drain or a slit drain, and then that has a pipe inside of it that would eventually, so that collects it and then it brings it to drainage structures.
So in your calculations, you feel that this drainage will handle everything, all the runoff from the roof?
We do, yes, and we did provide all the drainage calculations. So I think that we are well addressing the drainage from it. And again, even if we weren't, it's not heading towards the bank really at all. It's so flat there, and in fact, if anything, pitching down 1 foot towards the street. But yes.
And then getting back to the walkway and the ADA access, that being 12 feet wide. Now, I'm presuming that coming out of those doors with wheelchair access, those French, well, what are now going to be 6 foot wide sliders, there has to be, there has to be a certain amount of room to turn those chairs to be able to get down to where the ramp is. Now, whether you need that 12 feet or 10 feet, but that's something maybe you could look at. Again, I know you're gonna need more room there, certainly, because you're coming out of those doors with wheelchair access. And I do agree with John, if you're gonna put some mitigation in, I think that where you're doing that regrading on the other side is great. We have already determined this site is constrained. So, and I know, obviously you're talking, what size weddings are we talking about here, John? How many people? 400?
That would be like a maximum.
Yeah.
150 to close to 300, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I appreciate that you want to have the lawn there, and I appreciate that you want people to have a place there to walk in front of that tent, between the tent and the top of the wall. So I think if you could put your mitigation over on the other side as best you can, maybe look at that timber walkway and see if you can cut it down, John, a little bit. I would be in favor of this project. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Larry?
Thank you. I want to come back to Mark again. When the tent goes away, have you been seeding or sodding or both?
Sodding.
Okay, and that happens fairly quickly after the tent is taken down?
Yes.
Okay. Have you thought about including in this plan approval to repair the grass area within, say, 30 days of the removal of the tent with sod and whatever other treatment, just having that be part of the project? And the second question, this is really more for John O'Day, because it's an NOI, we're looking at an order of conditions. This order of conditions would expect the project to be completed twice a year. It's sort of like a pier, putting it in and putting it out. So in that regard, you might want some criteria, John, for us to consider as to what that order of conditions should say. And I'd recommend that it include sod replacement and whatever other vegetation is deemed necessary. And then I think that George's idea to see what could be done with plantings, whether it's along the top of the bank and or over at the east end, as John Abadili suggests, I would think there's a combination of that. And I would consider that an exception to the site constrained rather than abandoning site constraint or having it overruled. In other words, leave the prior designations in place, but say under these circumstances, mitigation is being proposed because of the unusual nature of the structure. So that's what I'm recommending. If that makes sense, I hope it does.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you.
Before I forget and go back to Louise, on the east end, when you're trying to regrade the area, I think you should have the erosion control during the construction of the regrading.
We did have a work limit, but we could add e-bales or wattles to that.
Yeah, because that's quite a steep slope when you're trying to regrade it, and then you're bound to have some erosions happening.
Okay.
Louise?
Yeah, thank you. Let's see, regardless of how effective the drainage plan is for the tent, just bear in mind that any kind of a structure that we're considering, we require drainage and we also require mitigation. So, I think we need to have mitigation as part of his proposal to cover the area of the tent.
Thanks, Louise. I think we have discussed enough here.
Excuse
Mr.
Tom?
Yeah, go ahead, Darcy.
Yeah, I just want to have a chance. As far as one of the things I mentioned to John O'Day, I wanted to have a confirmation on what the demarcation was for. When I went out there the first time to look at the grading, the area wanted the grade to put the smaller tables. I did confirm that there was the demarcation along the edge of lawn that's shown there.
Mhm.
But on the other side, where the tent is going to go, I could only find one demarcation bound, and it was at the corner where it's the widest. It's closer to where it bumps out at the 20, well, how do I do it? Just below the work limit line, where it's the widest, right there, down a little bit more. I found the one demarcation marker there, but I'm a little concerned about where you have on this plan edge of lawn. I was kind of right at the very edge of the top of the bank, I think. So I asked to have that, those demarcations should be shown on a revised plan, and to make sure that whatever was required, that we have that buffer strip still. I think some of it is missing along the whole edge of the top of the bank, but we need to confirm that.
Yes.
The other thing is, we need to think about in the order of conditions. You know, usually order is only good for 3 years, so I'm not sure what we would be counting this. That I guess the request is maintenance. We'd be calling about putting the tent up for 5 months of the year, but how we term it as a maintenance, that he would be able to continue to do this beyond the 3 years, or are we going to be doing that? This is only good every time he asks for a extension permit. We need to have that conversation to be able to keep doing this. And the season of the tent from May to middle of October in the special conditions.
Thank you, Darcy. John, you're saying something?
I think it would be, we've had a great discussion here, and I think that Mark and I can certainly go back to the membership and try to get back to you as soon as possible, trying to address these concerns. I think that it would be helpful to have a little bit more feedback on the mitigation if we could. You know, again, keeping in mind that this isn't you know, an impaired estuary. The grade's not going that way. We're not having runoff. Most of the things that mitigation is there for, and keeping in mind that this is seasonal. I mean, if we ran the full mitigation calculations, that would be like 16,000 square feet or something. We don't have 16,000 square feet on the property, probably. I don't see the club as being able to bring it all the way out to the 50 or even the work limit or anything here. As George was saying, you know, you got 300 people here every weekend. You got to have some room you got 300 people here for the function, and there was 300 people there for lunch and for breakfast before then. You know, we need some room to stretch here. So
we use that entire lawn for a lot of large club events too, like our big 4th of July celebrations and a lot of other happenings that go on, whether there's a tent there or not. We need the space.
So I'm just trying to get a feel on, is the bulk of the commission leaning towards a significant full-blown mitigation, or is it would be nice if we could do some sort of improvement? And I've certainly heard about the area over by the, you know, the snack bar, and I think that's, you know, I assume easily addressable, but the tent and what kind of mitigation might be expected, I'm not sure I have the feedback yet to get back to you in 2 weeks with something that I knew what was going to happen.
Let me go to Pete, and then towards the end, I think I can give you some hints, and then the other commissioner can chime in, you know, starting from Pete.
Would really appreciate it.
So Mr. O'Day and George educated me as to the my concerns about the nutrient runoff from the roof. So I am leaning more towards Commissioner Abadili's partially mitigated constraints. I liked what Abo said. I think that's the place that could stand it, as long as the amount, as Darcy said, of expected top of bank mitigation that's supposed to be there is there. So I'm a little easier than I was with this project 10 minutes ago.
Appreciate that.
Thanks, Pete. George?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, the only question I have, John, is there, I see where the edge of lawn, I was out there, I just don't recall. Is there room between the edge of the lawn and the top of the bank on the tent side for any mitigation at all?
I think that bank and stretch there is pretty heavily vegetated, but that's something that we can look at over the next week or two.
And I go along with just exactly what Pete said too.
Right.
If there's any room in there that you could stick some, on that side, that would be great. But if you can't, I go along with exactly what Pete said. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think one thing that we have to keep that in mind is that what Darcy was mentioning about the demarcation line on that side.
We can make sure that that's on this plan, and that would help the commission understand, where that edge of lawn will be by spring.
Larry?
Thanks. My thought on the mitigation is, first of all, rather than looking at a ratio, I would recommend zones or areas, John, where certain mitigation could be acceptable and workable and proposed. By that I mean, don't concentrate on the height of them. Concentrate on the type of vegetation that will be beneficial towards water flow and towards water retention. Things that Pete could probably articulate better than I, and then come back, and there may be some tweaking of the planting plan rather than focusing on the square footage, because I think square footage for mitigation in this case simply isn't applicable. And I think whether or not there's a reason down the road where we should consider making this a change in Chapter 704, I'm talking about propose a realistic mitigation plan. And if we don't find it realistic, then that's something we have to deal with, not you. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you.
Louise?
Well, I think we ought to ask ourselves, are we treating businesses differently than we are private citizens in terms of our permitting process? And just that. So, I think we ought to think about that during the time that we're continuing this.
Thanks, Louise. I just want to mention, if I can throw my 2 cents worth, is I think, John, you should calculate how much area that you need to mitigate. And I think what John Abadili is proposing is a kind of a mix, and see what is the maximum mitigation that you can provide on site. So that way we can cover on both ends. And I think that may be the way to go. And then the commission have a good chance to look at what you're proposing.
Fair enough. That's helpful direction.
So what kind of timing are you looking at? I don't want to go to the 28th because we have a lot of applications on the 28th. So I'm thinking of March 7th.
One thing just to bring it up, and I know it's only February right now, but on our end, from a timeline perspective, this kind of came up as a little bit of a surprise to us, as we had done it the last couple of years and got the permits and thought we're doing everything by the book. We have multiple weddings in June. Like, we have 3 weddings back to back in June that are inquiring about, is the tent going to be there? Is it not? Because if we don't get the tent, they have to book their own tents. and the tent companies are getting sold out for the summer on Cape Cod. The tent companies actually pushing us every day saying, are we doing this thing or not? Because if we don't, we're going to sell it to somebody else. So it is a little more time sensitive than what it may seem because we're not to the summer season yet. We're on a pretty strict timeline with letting, these people holding their weddings know if we're going to have a tent or if they need to try to find their own. So I just put that out there as a consideration.
But if we continue to March 7th, would that give you a lot of time for your commitment wise or no?
I would say as soon as you are able to have us come back, we would appreciate it. We're feeling the pressure right now, and I would hate to tell a wedding that, hey, we're not going to be able to do this, and then they're not able to book a tent because they're all sold out.
Well, the reason I suggested March 7th is on February 28th, we have almost like 12 applications. That would be a long night.
If I could just interject, it seems that we as a commission are likely to work with you on getting this allowed. That's my sense. And I think you could start to initiate confirmation with the moves without having to give a specific dimension of this or that. That's my sense.
Pete, I wouldn't do that. I would wait until if we continue to March 7th,
Okay.
March 7th, then you can do that, make that commitment.
Okay.
Or March 8th, you can make that commitment after we make that determinations. But we will try to work with you. Okay.
I will say just one other thing that comes to my mind is, to my understanding, mitigation is permanent, or it isn't often that it's reversed in any kind of way. And this seasonal tent is a commitment that the club is making to rent every single year right now. So 2 years from now, if we mitigate some of our property and then future management or the board of governors or whoever decides, yeah, we don't want to book the tent for the full season anymore, let the weddings book it on their own, then we would be going back to, now we aren't putting up this structure for 5 months, and it would go back to the weekly rentals. And so it is an annual decision. So as I think about long-term mitigation versus 2 years from now, the club could change its mind and say, leave it up to the weddings to put up their own tents.
I think that's what's part of the, what Larry or Darcy is suggesting in terms of what kind of conditions do we want to put on this order conditions. So you can think about it when we are, taking the continuance, because that order condition is only good for 3 years. What are we doing after that? We don't know until we have this, frank discussions, what you want to do. John.
The 7th. Is that what you said? Understood. That would work.
Okay.
I want to note quickly that Pete, I agree with your recommendation. My thought, sometimes we have a preliminary consensus that we consider, which I'm supporting conceptually, and that is, I think that we're inclined to approve a permanent seasonal, if you want to call it that, so that they can go ahead and place the order for the tent. The rest of it, Mark, I'm not concerned about what we call reciprocal or reverberated, whatever you want to call it, mitigation. I don't see there being a change in mitigation one way or the other. Whatever mitigation is put in is there. I don't see that being reversed. So those two things is the way I'm looking at it. But I think their request to have at least some sense of where this is going benefits them in terms of securing a tent. And I don't think that that's something that that we're going to oppose. So that's where I am.
Well, I think we should have a vote on the 7th and make that determination. So I don't want to make that early commitment at this point. Channel 18, any public comment on this?
Seeing none.
Could I have a motion to continue this applications to March the 7th?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadieli,
Aye.
Foster,
Unmute yourself, Luis.
Just keep going, George.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Sampu,
Aye.
Foster.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. See you on the March 7th.
Thank you.
The second NOI of the evening is Stephanie J. Gaskell, trustee Barley Neck Trust, construct and maintain a garage, attach and close the breezeway, removal of sections of existing paved driveway, stone retaining wall and post and rail fence, installation of gutters, downspouts and dry wells with proposed mitigation plantings and associated clearing, grading, utilities and landscaping at 540 Old Farmers Road, Marston's Mill, as shown in the assessors map 124 parcel 005. The applicant has submitted a request to continuance to February the 28th without testimony. Could I have a motion to continuance these applications to February the 28th without testimony?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Sampu,
Aye, but do we have to worry about whether or not this extension time
No,
of
because
1 day has been signed?
he's already signed for it.
Got it. Okay, yes. Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Hearn,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Abadili,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. That's unanimous.
Thank you. The next NOI is Janet Holian, trustee Holian Family Realty Trust, to construct a single-family dwelling and all associated appurtenances at 258 Windswick Way, Osterville, as shown in the assessors map 051 parcel 012. John.
Good evening, John O'Day from Sullivan Engineering Consulting, representing the applicants. This is approximately a 2-acre parcel of land on Oyster Harbors that was created on a plan approved by the planning board in July of 2022. It is a portion, or was a portion, of 250 Windswept Way. We have designated it as 250A, although the town has not given it its own map and parcel or address yet. But in general, it's the 2 acres on the north side of the existing driveway that heads to 250 Windswept. The wetland resource at this, it's a vacant parcel, but for that existing driveway. The wetland resource on the site is land subject to coastal storm flowage flood zone. On the opposite side of the private dirt way is a bordering vegetated wetland, which was flagged. The project as proposed is to construct a single family dwelling with all associated appurtenances. The dwelling itself has been designed outside of 100-foot buffer to the bordering vegetated wetlands, so it is located only within land subject to coastal storm flowage. We have a limit of work set up approximately 75 feet or so from that bordering vegetated wetland across the way. We have a septic system designed without variance and a septic permit issued from the health department, with that septic system being located 150 feet from the bordering vegetated wetland. You can't even see the Katuitt Bay on this, but probably 200 or 300 feet away from the coastal resource areas. The building will be designed to be FEMA and building code compliant. I think it's pretty straightforward, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Question from Commissioner George.
Yeah, I'll ask you the very popular question, John. I know it's not required, but given the location, it would be nice if you would just talk to the owner and see if they would be interested in an IA system.
We can certainly explore that.
Thank you.
Any other question from the commissioner? Bill?
I would just second what George said.
And I would just say, this is a prime example of where we could use an IA system as mitigation.
Except we don't need mitigation.
You don't need mitigation, but it's, you know, it would be real nice. Enough
But
said.
mitigation's not required here, so
No, I know. I'm just
Doesn't-
saying, this would be a good place where we could say, boy, we really like your project and we especially like your septic. So,
Yeah.
I just think, George, that's gonna require a lot of conversation.
I understand.
Thanks, George. Any more comment from the commissioner? Any public comment? Channel 18.
Yeah, we got a butter, David. Do you want to unmute and let everyone know who you are, where you live?
Hi, David.
Okay, good. Let me get sort of set up here. Thank you for allowing me, just gonna have some notes here of what I'd like to say. Thank you for taking my question. Also, I tried to send you some materials I wanted to reference so that you could talk from your own, you could look at your own files. Did the commissioners receive the information, and can I go through the cover letter, which sort of shows what I'm talking about?
I got an email late in the afternoon and did read it, so I don't know about the others.
Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to just let me talk and I'll explain what is?
I don't think you can share the screen because you're not the co-host.
Fine. Well, let me just get started. I have 6 rather serious concerns. First of all, let me say that I'm here with Patty Baker, who is the abutter on the other side. And I've also been in contact with the owners of 196 Windswept Way. Let me also say that I am an owner and the family trustee of the Moyer Dangler Fernandez parcel of land at 220 Windswept Way. We have owned this parcel of land since 1928. This parcel of land was originally part of a larger parcel that was subdivided basically with our purchase in 1928, and the Julian property house area was actually subdivided off in 1930. So this parcel of land goes back to 1930. It was one of the parcels developed before the Oyster Harbors Corporation, and as led by Paul Mellon, started putting everything into the land court. It was subsequently put in the land court, but the original application of 1930 is pre-land court, but then 1933 it gets into land court. Now, what's most important here is that 220 Windswept Way is located on Windswept Way. However, the plan that is being referenced, the A&R plan approved by the planning board dated 7/13/2022, is rather disquieting because it does not subdivide 250 Windswept Way along Windswept Way. It subdivides 215 Windswept Way along Sunset Point, and it seems to be depicting Windswept Way as a paper way rather than the existing way. If you look at the plan, at the land court plan 15354, either the A version from 1933 or more importantly, the 105 version from 1951, it shows very clearly that Windswept Way crosses the subject parcel that's referenced to Joseph Carney, and it gives the land court number for that. On this land court plan, it does not show that that what is now called Sunset Point. It does not show that as an access way as part of the land court Oyster Harbors system. It was at that time a common It was a common driveway to serve a number of parcels to the southwest of the parcel called I-1ZZZ, which was actually owned by Paul Mellon and was an out parcel that could not be developed. So anyways, the applicant has every right to try to subdivide her land, but if she's going to subdivide 250 Windswept Way, it needs to be according to a plan that properly shows Windswept Way, does not include Windswept Way for purposes of calculation, does not include the land that's north of Windswept Way, because Windswept Way is now being treated as a frontage road. So I raise this of concern to you for two reasons. One, the fundamental problem of the subdivision, but also in order for Windswept Way to be brought up to the width, grade, and construction necessary for a subdivision along Windswept Way, I would think that the planning board would want to look at what's being done, because let me now talk about how Windswept Way not only runs along a wetland.
Excuse me, Dave.
Yeah.
Here is only a conservation issues that we are under our jurisdictions. If you are talking about the land court and stuff like that, that's a zoning issues.
Okay.
You have to go back to the zoning board.
Okay, so all I'm saying is that if improvements needed to be made to Windswept Way, the Conservation Commission would want to know about it. Also, I want to point out that there is an issue of water being removed from the golf course, crossing Windswept Way, crossing the Julian property and being pumped into the water along into the marshland along Sunset and so forth. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. I also wanted to bring to your attention that under the FEMA FIR floodplain study, this parcel that they want to develop is located within the floodplain. And I wanted to make sure that the Conservation Commission issued their permit in the order of conditions, understanding that. So I'll leave that at that. Okay, I'm on to part number 5, and that is that although this application is for construction of a new house located on this parcel 250A, over the last year, the applicant has already constructed several auxiliary structures and a pool and installed a new septic system. And so it seems to me that as part of the review of the 250 application, you should be aware of how there's been an increase in the septic load on the site, which is there, and it all is going down to Windswept Way and then across or under or through whatever Windswept Way to this wetland that's on the Oyster Harbors Club parcel and on the 196 parcel. My final point is simply to point out that there's an enormous issue of stormwater runoff being increased by all of the construction that's already been done. I do see in the current plan there is some mention of drainage runoff cisterns or something for roof runoff. However, the construction that was done a few feet to the south, the new pond house, the new pool house, the new carriage house, the upgraded carriage house with both of which with apartments. I asked Mr. Ford what was the load, and I forget exactly what he said, but it was something like 3 or 4 bedrooms had been added, and the load was like that. So I just think while you're considering the permit for this portion, this project on 250. 250A Windswept, you'd be aware of the recent construction on 250B. As I say, I'm very concerned that this the stormwater. There's also been a large removal of trees. The direct butters, me, others, are very concerned that Windswept Way may be undermined and injured by all the increased stormwater flow. We're very concerned that the septic system currently built at a height of about 4 to 7 feet is located above the grade of Windswept Way. And I think we're going to see water and even septic problems with Windswept Way and the wetland. And I'm very concerned that during storms, the storm surge that will come up as shown on the FEMA plan and the stormwater runoff because of all the impervious surfaces. Windswept Way, which is of course a Oyster Harbor's maintained way for access, that has to be maintained so that the fire trucks can serve all of the parcels along here. And we're very concerned that whatever development is done, there are mitigation measures so that there's not damage to the access road in the area.
Thank you, Dave.
So that's a summary of my concerns at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Like I said, you know, the only thing that we can make a judgment call and discussion is really with the conservation's jurisdictions in terms of your you know, the land court case and the layout, the documentation and all that requirements that would be under the planning department or the CBA. So
also, wouldn't the building commissioner be making a determination regarding zoning issues and then the building permit? Is that right, or just
correct?
To help us? Right.
You know, even we approve the permit, the building department have to go through the building requirement in terms of the building and the flood zone and all those compliance regulations.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Wick, any more public comment on this?
Seeing none.
Could I have a motion to approve this project as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster. Gilmore, aye. Hearn,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Moran.
Aye.
Sampu. Okay,
Aye.
Moore. Yep. I got the aye from Warren. I got the aye from Sampu. Foster. Where'd Louise
Louise,
go?
yourself.
She's there. She's unmuted.
No, she's muted, it says.
Oh,
It's
I see
muted.
her. I see her as unmuted. Are you there, Louise?
I'm here now. You hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Aye.
Okay. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good
Thank
luck.
you very much, everybody.
The next NOI is Deborah O'Rourke, proposed pool patio and retaining wall on an existing residential property at 35 Hall Lane, Contiguous as shown in Assessors Map 019, Parcel 162. Dan Ojala.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, sorry. I was trying to get some other work done while you guys were debating these long items here. So we're looking at a luckily, I think for the pace of the evening, a pretty quick plan. This is a replacement of an existing pool and patio in the back of a home here at 35 Hall Lane. I'm sorry. The situation is that we've got an undisturbed buffer. It's a huge lot. There's a good sized wetland in the back, but the great news is there's a nice big undisturbed buffer, and we're well outside of the 50. We're putting up basically
Dan,
it's
show the map, show your plan.
I can. Let me see. the replacing of an existing pool with a little bit larger one. And the existing patio sticks out just about as far as this one. It's a 12,120.
Dan, you there?
I'm seeing the plan.
Attempting to find this plan. I apologize. I was lulled to sleep by the long hearings there. I had about 8 million things open on my screen. I don't know if Darcy could pull it up quicker than I could or not, but let me see. Here's the site plan finally. 18 million things in the, so I'm going to hit share on this, and I believe I'm able to do that. Share screen too. And,
It's coming up.
Pull up now. So again,
Yep.
again, the beautiful thing in this is a full 35 foot. If you look at the aerial and so forth, it's heavily vegetated. There's a slope there, and the existing back of the patio, which you can see the very faint terms near where my hand is here, but there's a patio just about in the same line as what we're proposing there. Kind of serves as the work limit on the property, and they don't really go in the back any further because it slopes down into the wetland. So all they're looking to do is sort of redo and refreshen up the hardscape that's in the back. You can look at the pictures in the package, but a very similar project to what's there now, just a little bit more robust wall. There's still a fence on the back, very similar to what's being proposed now. Because we fully meet the buffer, the slight amount of hardscape that's increased, which really isn't much, I would estimate only a couple hundred square foot, does not need mitigation. We're proposing a roof dry well or a dry well / drawdown pit, a nice big 4-foot pit with 2 foot of stone on this end here. And Crossroads Pool and Landscape is doing their normal little slip drains and drainage into that system. Be a pretty straightforward project. I would be glad to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Any question from the commissioner, Louise?
It looks like an interesting project. My only concern is getting the equipment in there to do what's got to be done. And so I'm sure you have a plan for that in terms of how it's going to happen, but I think that there ought to be a lot of discussion about construction protocol with staff ahead of time.
Fair enough. It's a very experienced pool crew that's doing it, and I think we'll just come around from the north side there. It's 1 foot contours. It looks like a ski slope, but in reality, it's not too bad coming around that corner there, and I think they'll access from the north there.
Thank you.
There's a quick question, Louise. You may want to take a look at your leaching pit and loading ray and all that stuff, and then determine where is your proper way to access to the construction site. That's only my quick comment, that because Louise mentioned that. The other things too, because your retaining wall is more than 5 feet. So, you're going through a structural engineer to design the retaining wall. So I think that you may have to, it may come back as a change some of the profile stuff, and whether it will be encroaching to your existing limit of work line and whatnot. I think that's a minor thing, but if there is a change in terms of the footprints, you should come back with a revised plan for that. Larry.
Dan, obviously it's impossible. I was not going to go around outside down into that heavy vegetation. So maybe you can tell me what the footings or the piles or whatever it is that's holding up that deck, because right now you're proposing a retaining wall, and this new pool and patio is going to be sitting on top of that. So what's under there now? Is that part of the reason why you're doing this, or is there some other reason, condition that we should know about?
So the existing pool grade and the proposed pool grade are very similar. You can see it here. And so those are on sonotubes. If we find anything's deficient, we'd probably replace it with a diamond pier or a Bigfoot sonotube or something of that nature. But it's a relatively lightly loaded deck. It's not huge, and you can see the footings here. So those will either be retained or replaced per code. I wouldn't see any real big problems with that in this case, Mr. Moore.
So the biggest issue probably is going to be removing this thing. Is that fair to say? Just getting it all out of there? Is that going to be the?
It's an excavation in a very similar area to where we are now. One of the big things is we're proposing good size blocks. It's a London boulder wall, which is a very robust gravity wall. So this is the design here. You just set them down 6 inches on a nice big crushed gravel base, and they're just massive. But they have a nice face towards the not that we have a neighbor there, but a nice relief on that and a planter top. But those blocks do weigh a bit, but again, they'll be trucked in. We'll probably put a steel plate to the point made earlier over the end of the leaching so we don't crush that. We did the septic upgrade here in 2012, and I believe those are H20 chambers, but you don't want to mess around. So we'll probably plate that, recommend that over the D-box especially, and use access, down here. Pretty straightforward project. Again, we're well back and you can see that the grade really isn't too bad to get around here with a forklift carrying those blocks. All-terrain forklift should handle them pretty nicely. So again, digging this out, we'll probably temporarily bench the site down a little bit, build the wall, then build it up and excavate the pool. But again, it's an upland site. There's a robust work limit line. You don't need a big footing for this wall, so you just stack it just like a foot below grade, hardly any excavation. Should come together nicely, I would think.
And you do have a drawdown pit shown at the bottom of the drawing. So I take it that's not going to be draining towards the wetland. It's just going to go into the soil. Is that correct?
Correct. We've got strip drains on either side, and those will be piped into the same drawdown pit. We'll use that. It's semi-pervious patio, but we'll have strip drains on either end that flow into that large pit, and we'll make sure that's set down in clean sand so that there is no infiltration or surface runoff towards the wetland. Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Any other question from the commissioner? 10:18. Any public comment on this?
Seeing none.
None. Could I have a motion to approve this project, subject to notification of the staff about the construction protocol for that constructions?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Sanfu,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn.
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
The last NOI of the evening is Margaret Robero. Constructions of 2 stone retaining wall and a 2nd-story additions above an existing garage at 120 Cobblestone Road, Barnstable, as shown in the Assessors Maps 316, parcel 063-001. Paul. Is Paul with us?
Hey, yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me share my. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
coming up.
Okay, thank you. Yep, my name is Paul Mancuso. I am here with the BSC group on behalf of Margaret Riviero for a project at 120 Cobblestone Road. This past summer, they received an enforcement order for unpermitted retaining walls, this lower stone wall here at the edge of their lawn. And there was an existing stone wall here, but they enlarged it and extended it and added these stairs. And so the enforcement order was for any hardscape that was installed that was unpermitted within the 100-foot buffer zone to the wetland on site. So we went out, delineated the wetland, surveyed the property, created an existing conditions plan that you guys have. And so we are now here to permit the hardscape that was installed without a permit in conservation jurisdiction. The hardscape is primarily this lower stone wall that you see here, this upper stone wall, and they installed a concrete brick driveway here. They had a little bit of permitted paved driveway over here, but this is the unpermitted hardscape over here. And then they had added some extra hardscape for this paver patio, wood deck, and gazebo around the existing pool. And so that was the unpermitted hardscape that was installed. Additionally, as part of this notice of intent, we are looking to permit a second-story addition over the existing garage right here. This will not create any new impacts to the buffer zone as it's going over top of the existing garage. There will be there's proposed a 4x8 balcony sticking off of the second-story apartment, but that will be over top of the existing driveway, not creating any new impacts from what is existing. And so I apologize. The plan that you guys have does not list the buffer zone impacts. Our engineer has calculated them out. I have them on the plan that I'm sharing with you now. And so they have almost an entirely undisturbed 0 to 50 foot buffer surrounding the wetland. Right here, they have approximately 180 square feet of lawn that exists within the 0 to 50 foot buffer. And then this lower stone wall that was installed, just the very end of it, a few square feet is also within the 0 to 50. But so most of the impacts that were installed are within the 50 to 100 foot buffer here. In total, 1,470 square feet of hardscape was added, that was unpermitted. And so that's what we are here to get permitted. In reviewing the Barnstable regulations for activities in the buffer zone, it seems like once the 0 to 50 foot buffer zone is fully undisturbed and vegetated, that no additional mitigation would be required. I would like to request that since only a small section of lawn here within the 0 to 50 remains, approximately 183 square feet, that no mitigation would be required, seeing as they have very large sections of the 50 to 100 that are undisturbed. There's no plan to disturb any of that buffer zone. And so essentially that's what we're looking to permit. If the commission requires mitigation plantings, I've discussed with the client, we could plant some sweet pepper bush in that area to fill in the rest of the 0 to 50 so that there is a fully undisturbed 0 to 50 foot buffer zone. But we would like to request that since they have very large portions of the 50 to 100 also well vegetated, undisturbed, that they might be able to keep this rectangular lawn that they currently have. But so that's essentially it. That's what's been installed, and what they're proposing is this second story addition. So at this point, if the commission has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Paul. John?
Just something I wasn't clear of, that retaining wall, does some of that retaining wall go into the 0 to 50?
Yeah, based on the calculations, I was speaking with our engineer. He said 180 square feet of lawn exists in the 0 to 50, and I guess it would just be the remaining 3 square feet, probably 1 or 2 rocks extend from the 50 to 100 into the 0 to 50. That stone wall was, they put that there right at the edge of the lawn. It's kind of the whole yard pitches a little bit to the wetland, but it's much steeper beyond this area. So they installed this stone wall here to stabilize that area. But yes, just a very small portion of it does extend into the 0 to 50.
Okay, then just speaking for myself, I am not willing to buy that deal. I think you must, at a minimum, restore the 0 to 50 to be fully undisturbed. That's what the regulation says. I don't see any reason to grant an exception to that right now. I think absolutely that should be restored, in my view.
I can put my 2 cents too, because I don't think that I would need that mitigations, full mitigations between the 0 and the 50s. Larry?
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate and respect the way you presented this. When I was there on Saturday, I believe, Mrs. Ribeiro came out and explained to me that here where it says a stone wall off of this parking area, the stones that are here used to be there, and they removed them because there was erosion going here. So, and this looks very good. They did a very nice job of the way they constructed this. However, we had back in Centerville several months ago, I forget the name of the guy, but we had an issue very similar to this where we had a little sliver that just was in the 50, and that the distinction between that one and this one, in my mind, is that there was very little room to maneuver around here and do much. Also, there was sheathing to put in that one. This doesn't apply. This is a situation that was, and I don't know what the enforcement order said, but I'm assuming that the enforcement order referred to this as being not only not permitted, but unapprovable. In this case, I agree with John Abadili, and I think that the Ribieros should come back in and bring this line right along the inside of this. They're not going to lose anything by it, and I think that would bring them in compliance with the literal terms of the regulation. I don't see any other issues here that concern me. Now, some of the other commissioners may have other issues, and if so, I will appreciate hearing from them and then deciding how to talk. But this particular part, I think, needs to be corrected, Paul, and I'm pretty confident that the Ribieros will go along with that. So that's my point of view at this moment, and I'll reserve if any other comments come up, I'll come back on it. Thank you.
Louise?
Yeah, I agree with John and Larry. There's another alternative. They could leave that that incursion in the 0 to 50 as is and mitigate for that as well as for what is going on in the 50 to 100. I think either option would be open to them, but that mitigation has to be done one way or the other. Either a correction of the that wall along the 50-foot buffer, or extensive mitigation for things that are going on elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Bill?
Yeah, I'd just like to throw my oar in, and yes, I agree with Larry, and I agree with John, and I agree with Louise. Mitigation is needed, and you mentioned sweet pepper bush, which seems like a good species to plant.
Yep, well, I appreciate all that feedback. Yeah, we chose sweet pepper bush when I did the delineation. There's quite a bit of that already within the buffer zone, so it'll match the surroundings. And yeah, if the commission will require that, I spoke with the Ribieros. They are on board with planting some sweet pepper bush in that area. Based on the size, 180 square feet, and the spacing recommended in the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension planting list, I believe, based on their spacing, 8 would fill up that area, but we would be happy to propose 12, as the plants that are going in will not be fully matured, and that spacing is based on a mature plant. We can come back with a plan that shows that area planted with sweet pepper bush. I was thinking approximately 12 individuals in that area should fill it up. And the portion of the wall that extends into 50, they can cut that off so that that lower stone retaining wall does not enter the 0 to 50.
So Tom, we could approve this with that condition in there, subject to receipt of a revised plan showing those changes.
Right, and then the planting plans. But I have a couple more questions just to clarify. One, by the time you add the second floor in the garage, are you adding any additional bedrooms?
I would need to check on that.
The reason I ask, a lot of the people put a bedroom up there. If you put that additional bedroom in there, you might change your septic design on the site. So that is under the Board of Health jurisdiction that you need to go through. Okay.
That's Tom Lee's other hat.
That's the other half. And secondly, with this conditional approval, we are not approving the paver that you have on the neighbor. Okay, that's your problem that you have to deal with the neighbor. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah, I believe the neighbors. Actually, I'm not sure. I'm not going to speak on that, but I hear what you're saying. That makes perfect sense.
Because that's between your applicant, your clients, and the neighbor to deal with that. We are not making any judgment call on that paver. we're
Yeah.
not approving that because that's not in front of us in terms of looking at that. Channel 18, any public comment on this?
Seeing none.
Could I have a motion to approve this project subject to receipt of a revised plan showing the planting in the full 50 area?
So moved.
Second,
Roll call.
Kern,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Moran,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Sampu,
Aye.
Abadili.
aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. Good luck.
Yep, thank you very much.
We have two continuance. The first one is Christian Camp Meeting Association proposed dock and stairways reconstructions at 160 Lake Elizabeth Drive, Centerville, as shown on Assessors Map 226, parcel 137. This is a continuance from January the 3rd, and the applicants have requested for a continuance to June 6th. And this will be the last request for a continuance because we have been asking them to provide the engineering design on that dock and with a stamp plan, and they have trouble trying to get the stamp plan done in timely fashion. So could I have a motion to continue this to June the 6th?
So moved.
Second,
Roll call.
Sampu,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Kern,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Foster,
Aye.
Abadili.
aye.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. The last continuance, Stephen and Beth McFarland. Constructions of permanent pile supported pier for non-motorized vessels at 150 Carriage Road, as shown on the Assessors Map 071 parcel 015003. And this is a continuance from January the 3rd. And Arlene.
Good evening, Arlene Wilson, AM Wilson Associates, here for the McParlands. It's been a few weeks since you've seen this, so I'll briefly summarize the project. The site is a 2.13 acre lot on the southeast side of Oyster Harbors. It was first developed in 1935, although the McParlands are relatively new owners. The site has 163 feet of shore frontage on West Bay. The McParlands are seeking permission to construct a pier to service non-motorized boats. The longest pier they can have under your regulation, 703-4, is 81.5 feet beyond mean low. At that location, there's between 2.5 and 2.7 feet of water depth at mean low water. The town shellfish maps rank the area as a 6 out of 10. And so we would need 30 inches of freeboard under the boat at mean low if we were going to have a motorboat. That depth of water would not allow for any boat. So we're only seeking non-motorized berthing at this location. The commission asked us to see whether the pier could be shortened. However, Mr. McFarland has told us he may also get a small sailboat. And so shortening the pier didn't seem to be advisable. You certainly wouldn't want a small sailboat sitting on the bottom where there are shellfish. And so I think the length that we've originally proposed, which is 81 feet beyond mean low, is appropriate for the site. The pier is designed with an end platform rather than a float. That's because we would need float stops, and in the shallow depth of water, that float would occasionally be out of the water entirely. I'm getting older. The McFarlands are my age, and to be honest with you, I think float stops in that kind of a situation are unsafe. They certainly don't feel good when you walk on the pier in that condition. And so we've provided a fixed end structure instead, which will be above the water at all tides. We've also shown a series of steps on the south side of that platform to facilitate access to the non-motorized boats that are being proposed. We have shown those stairs now to be removable so that they won't stay in the water in the wintertime. That removability will facilitate cleaning and reduce the potential for trapping debris. I think you can see them on the right side of the end platform in this particular view of the pier design. Similar stairs were approved for the Tavilla project on Long Beach, where the shellfish ranking is even higher than this. It's a 9, and where there is somewhat more debris floating in the water than there is here. The kayak racks have been moved to the south side of the pier. That's the right side as you look at this view. That's to leave the north side open in case the sailboat gets pulled around to that north side of the pier. The bent sections that are shown here are 15¼ feet on center. That maximizes the opening space between the piles while still allowing for relatively light type of construction. Liz Lewis noted that CZM once proposed a much greater pile space that was 20 feet between piles. That spacing was to avoid scour impacts. However, it was quickly abandoned because of the need to use extremely large carrying beams, 12 by 12s, sometimes greater than that, which increased the need for preservatives and created much greater shade where the piers were relatively low to the water. It was also found that in most moderate tide ranges, 5 feet or less, and here we only have about 3 feet of tide range, non-storm tide velocities were seldom sufficient to cause scour. We would note that we're not debating or contesting the habitat ranking here. Our shellfish report showed similar habitat to that of the ranking maps, and that was shown by Ms. Lewis's report. Rather, the project seeks conformance with your regulations by seeking permission for only non-motorized boats. As then Commissioner Houle noted during the Cohen hearing in 2021, the shellfish maps are not intended to determine whether an applicant can have a pier, but rather how much protection the habitat gets from a boat berthed at the dock. If it's a low habitat ranking, it requires 12 inches for a motorboat. In a high ranked area, 6 or more, such as this one, it requires 30 inches. And the alternative is a non-motorized boat. The Cohen project, which we cite in the supplemental information that we provided to the commission last week, that project was for a permanent pier. It was authorized in April of 2021, only 2 years ago, in an area where the habitat is ranked for 10, and the bent spacing appears only to be 10 feet. In addition, it's in an area where public navigation traffic is significantly heavier than this one. And having listened to the tape of that hearing, as well as looking at the minutes, there was not a word about fouling organisms, even from Commissioner Sampu, who was the sole negative vote on that project. There have been no changes in section 703 since the Cohen Pier was approved. In response to Ms. Lewis's memo of the 13th of this month, we would note that in spite of essentially every lot from West Bay Terrace south, except the McParland lot, having a permanent pier used for motorboats for decades, the habitat ranking for this reach of shore has increased from a 3 in 2001 to a 6 in 2011. And the Shellfish Committee has inferred that it is about to go, that ranking is about to go up again. What this shows is that piers and good shellfish habitat can and indeed do coexist and are not mutually exclusive. Also, in response to Ms. Lewis, it's relatively easy to tell the difference between raw sand and a winter salt marsh in aerial photography. We provided that aerial photography to the commission for the record. And it is our professional opinion that the salt marsh here is indeed growing. The McParlands have no kayaks presently. They do not drag things through the marsh, nor do they make a habit of walking through the marsh along the shore. They recognize the marsh value for erosion control, finfish and shellfish nursery habitat, and pollution attenuation. That's why they're requesting a pier to facilitate their access to the water for navigation. I won't rehash my feelings on pilings versus posts. You've heard me say that a number of times. I went through it at the first session of this hearing. But it remains my professional opinion that a permanent pile-supported pier is more environmentally friendly than a seasonal post-supported pier, and that the impact and destruction of habitat after just a few years of a seasonal pier is equivalent to what happens with the permanent piling installation. I would remind you that shellfish habitat is protected under the Wetlands Protection Act, but your ordinance only protects the shellfish themselves, although Regulation 703 does define shellfish habitat, but not shellfish. Only non-commercial shellfishing is included under the definition of recreation. You don't have a place in the ordinance where commercial shellfishing is actually protected. Relative to fouling organisms, the issue is not whether they grow on the piles, but do the ones that can grow on piles cause damage to any interest of the act or the ordinance? Based on our research, and I will be honest with you, if I never read another paper on fouling organisms again, it will be too soon. The varieties of fouling organisms, soft-bodied fouling organisms that prefer piles appear to be different than those which are commonly called carpet tunicates and which tend to spread across the bottom, cover bottom anchored fishing gear and eelgrass. It seems to be those carpet varieties of fouling organisms that are problematic for shellfish rather than the few varieties that can grow on wood piles in this area. Because most wooden piles that are used here are treated with CCA, very little, including fouling organisms, grow on them. However, if that remains a concern of the commission, you certainly have the ability to require us to use tropical hardwood piles by writing that into an order of conditions. And I will stop there and take questions that the commission might have.
Thank you, Arlene. As Arlene mentioned, Elizabeth Lewis, our natural resource biologist, has submitted her report dated February the 13th. I think at that time, I don't know whether she know that you are proposing a small sailboat. So that's why she kind of mentioning about the seasonal versus the permanent pier as the comment. And I just want to read that in the record so that people can see that. With a seasonal pier, these piling are much smaller than impeding less flow, and it is gone half of the year for allowing the area to be a break and recover. As much as pumping in and out of the piling causes area of disturbance and turbidity twice a year and localized liquidations of sediments. Some of these habitats are able to recover, which is why it is critical if a pier is permitted here, only a seasonal one should be considered. With the removal of a seasonal pier, it allows commercial shellfishery important access to the resource available here. Do keep in mind, however, natural resource in no way of supporting a seasonal or permanent pier at these locations when there are some alternative available. Again, like I mentioned, I don't know whether Liz Lewis at that time when she wrote up this report, knowing that you are proposing a small sailboat or not. So that, I think the other one is the waterway. I think it's okay with this because they say that there is a lot of flow activity up in this area. So let me go to John.
Thank you, Tom. Look, first of all, this exotic species, I mean, Peter Shampoo has submitted incredible evidence. Arlene has submitted evidence that she says disagrees with that. That's all on the record. Pete, I don't think we need to go through all that again. I mean, all of that science is already in the record as well as it should be. Arlene, where I take very strong objections, I mean, vehemently strong objections to you to say that our regulation says we are responsible for shellfish, but not shellfish habitat. That is illogical to say that we have to preserve and protect shellfish, but we cannot regulate habitat. That is a legal reading that I just honestly disagree with strenuously. Secondly, you quote those prior peers. In fact, what's happened is new science, new biologists working for the town, submitting their evidence, their testimony, and their feelings on seasonal versus permanent. Finally, you also forget that regulation that you refer to, in my opinion, incorrectly, also says seasonal piers are preferred. That's written into the regulation. So I really have some strong objections to some of the arguments you've raised, Arlene. I give you immense credit for the amount of work and research you have put into this. I really do compliment you for that. I think it comes down to this commission weighing the evidence as submitted by you, weighing the evidence as submitted by Dr. Shampoo, weighting the opinion of two very well-known biologists, Tom Marcotti, the predecessor of Liz. So that's what we as a commission have to do. We have to weigh that evidence and decide in a non-arbitrary, non-irrational basis which of those conflicting testimonies this commission will accept. You do mention other permanent docks in the area. That doesn't, to me, justify alone adding a permanent dock here. At some point, you got to say, okay, enough is enough. Over history, we've learned things. So at least that's where I'm coming from on this.
Thanks, John. Pete.
Okay, I won't go into any of the specifics of my two most recent bits of information, one from the EPA and the other from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It is on the record. I will put forth some conclusions that I've drawn. The conclusion that, and the reason I brought in the EPA site is again, talking, and again, this is sound science, it's settled science. EPA is that for invasive species, and this, Arlene, goes to some of the claims that you were making at our first hearing on this. So on the EPA site, all fully referenced, invasive species on hard surfaces, including permanent floating docks and piers. So you had made repeated suggestions that invasive problems were on floating docks. and seemingly excluding hard surface piers. And so I just want to say that that is not a distinction made by EPA. You made the suggestion that it is on the floats that is where the problem is. I would suggest here, relating to the testimony you gave last time, that the Invasive Species Rapid Assessment Survey associated with the Massachusetts Bays program is a quick, keyword here, cost-effective approach to detect and mount effective response plans to the early stage of an invasive species colonization. Its protocol is focusing on floating docks in high-use areas, such as marinas, for both ease of access and year-to-year repeatability. The information provided by this is not supposed to be exhaustive. Rather, it's a standardization allowing easy sharing of information between agencies and states. On to the conclusion that I would draw, and I had it here for all of our education, estuaries tutorial. I would like to steal one of your sayings, Commissioner Abadili. Each project before us is decided on its own merits. It is our responsibility to assess whether a less impactful alternative exists to the one proposed by the applicant. So that is what's before us tonight. In our estuaries evaluation on this human disturbances to estuaries, this is the NOAA article or the NOAA reference. Conservation Commission acknowledges the sensitivity of these ecosystems, estuaries, to human activities and has a responsibility to minimize deleterious effects on these environments as they represent major attractions to our citizens and tourists alike. I put in bold on the human disturbances to estuaries because, Arlene, you seem to suggest that the only worry for our invasive species are tunicates. And they're not plants, they're of the subphylum Chordata, which we belong to as well. But I want to suggest, I'm going to use evidence here, is that Chesapeake Bay is not that much different than our bays. And again, I spent 13 years as a scientist out in Chesapeake before coming up here. And given my background in biological oceanography, I am speaking with professional authority here, having as well published peer review articles where I did the identification of the native benthic invertebrates. I do not have the professional expertise to work with the rapid assessment survey. That goes to many other volunteers. But what is happening in Chesapeake Bay is there are 160 invasive species that have now been documented there. My worry, as in Chesapeake Bay, is that this is a growing number throughout our estuaries. And one thing that is unknown to us is no scientist really knows a priori whether a particular non-native organism will present an invasion problem to our bay ecosystems. So what we try to do as a conservation in the field of science is to limit the proliferation and extension of non-native species. My concluding statement to the human disturbances of estuaries article, and it relates also to the EPA. The best available science is sounding the alarm on the introduction and subsequent establishment of invasive organisms to estuaries. It is considered a biological pollutant, these organisms, because once they're established, they don't go away. Pollutants, sewage, pesticides, heavy metals, they tend to dilute themselves and over time present less of a problem to the environment. Completely different for biological pollutants, AKA invasive species. They can tend to overwhelm local environments, and there are examples. One given here is San Francisco Bay, where they now dominate San Francisco Bay's ecosystem. While permanent piles are not the vector for these organisms, piles do represent an unnatural substrate that scientific studies have shown to be preferentially colonized by non-native species. CONCOM has no control on the coastal development outside of the 100 feet, but we should try to minimize this biological pollution threat to our coastal ecosystems. So while a few permanent piles may seem insignificant, we should all be aware of the degradation of our Southside estuaries and their death by 1,000 cuts. Arlene, I definitely want to commend you on your your pile analysis post the Ryan Pier. And George, I'd like for you to pay particular note here as well, because you actually have a professional experience with putting in docks. I think coastal development was something you did as a professional. So the 15 or so docks or items in front of us where we did allow permanent piles to be put in, where the shellfish habitat was higher than we could have requested, less impact. When something is for a boat lift or a tie-off or for a float, George, is it your opinion that a temporary 4-inch square piling is a sound enough support for such an item such as this, be it a boat lift or for a float or for tie-offs? Can that be done with a 4-inch pile, George?
For a float, it can. Boat lift, it cannot.
And where we did, Arlene, get all of this evidence you pulled in here, were these existing docks, were they 4-inch pile docks that we subsequently said every single thing could be here now, a full-blown permanent pile, or were they permanent piers to which things were added?
Most of them were permanent piers. However, the commission has the authority to limit extensions of piers to seasonal. So you can have a hybrid pier. In fact, one of my clients has one like that, although it was authorized pre-Ryan rather than post-Ryan. And the commission required that the extension be seasonal post-supported. So you've done it before, but chose not to do it on any of the ones that we documented.
Yes, I think what you're finding here, that we're generally fairly consistent. The Cohen reference that you made, I thought it was actually a 4-2 decision. I could be wrong. I know I voted disgusted when we passed that, because I think it was a tremendous mistake on our part. If we make a mistake, doesn't mean that we're held to it for every issue or every pier thereafter. In terms of including the Wello as one of these, that got approved by us on a technicality eventually, although we denied it originally. And that technicality was a 21-day rule that we didn't meet. So I think actually that most of your pile support here is consistent with our tradition. As Commissioner Abedili says, that if we have a seasonal, if we have a non-motorized use of a dock, that it is seasonal, allowing a half a year out, limiting invasives, but also allowing the natural conditions of waves and wind to reset the bottom underneath that. I think that is it for me from now, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pete. George?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think I've been pretty consistent. I strongly feel that a permanent pier is less invasive and less detrimental to the environment than a seasonal dock. I've felt that way for however long I've been in business. I've done both. I've experienced both, and I agree with Arlene that I think you disturb the bottom once with a permanent pile dock, and it does less damage in the long run. to the environment. As far as, you know, I thought it was interesting that Arlene brought up that Cohen dock, because I remember distinctly that Dennis was very adamant in how he looked at that, and that he, you know, the shellfish ratings were not to eliminate docks, but to you know, limit the boat that used the dock, and it was rather referred to the depth of water was the requirement. Cohen had plenty of depth of water at the end of that dock for his motors. So I agree 100% with what Dennis said. And in the case of this invasive issue, as I read all these documents, the one factor that is consistent throughout is that boats are the things that make these things, you know, transport these things to our sites. So what are we going to do? Eliminate all boats? That's the answer. Now, obviously, we can't do that, right? So I just don't see. And again, I've put piling in for 40 years. I pulled piling out. I've never seen, and again, I agree with you, Pete, I don't know what all invasives look like. I know what squirts look like. I've never seen a squirt, or for that matter, other than a minimal amount of algae growth and certainly barnacles on a CCA piling, or for that matter, most any piles, even creosote piles. Barnacles certainly, not a lot of growth otherwise. So I look at this and I'm in favor of it. I wouldn't be in favor of making that recipe that Arlene sent us, though. Having said that, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, George. Larry?
Arlene, before we go, I didn't look into the application while we were talking. What is the size of the piling you're proposing? 4, 6, 8, or 12?
We're proposing 12s. They're the easiest to get, and the contractors will feel that they're the easiest to install or maintain.
Okay, now the piers on either side of this, I sent pictures to Darcy, but Darcy noted that they were somewhat blurred, and I didn't have time to correct it, but I took pictures going either direction. Do you remember what the piling size were for those two abutting piers?
I
think I can answer that, Arlene, if you'd like.
I was going to say, I've worked on the Popio side. I know that his are 12 inches.
They're 12 inch on both sides.
Okay. I'm not saying just because those are 12 that we have to have 12. I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to get some comparisons. I broke this down a couple of weeks ago. I broke it down on my own into 5 categories. They're not lengthy. The most significant issue seems to be permanent versus seasonal. Tied in with that is shellfish issues, and also tied in with it is Chapter 703 issues. So that being said, however, the positives of this particular application, first of all, the question just came up. If it's non-motorized, does that mean it has to be seasonal? I've never heard that. I've been aware of the fact that we have tended to make non-motorized being with kayaks and canoes customarily have been seasonal, but I think that hasn't been the trend in all cases. This particular property is unique. It's specific, but it's also general. There is no pier here, quite obviously. There never has been one. The piers on either side of it go further into the water and waterway, and they appear to have motorized vessels on them. This is not. The question is whether or not there would be negative or adverse or negative environmental impacts. I think the discussion has been scientifically, there's certain conditions that come into play, whether boats bring them in or whether the vegetation or exotic things attached to the pilings or floats. That seems to be somewhat debated, although it seems to be in general that they're tied to the float. This particular float is not a float, it's a platform, a removable platform, which is the first one I think we've ever seen. I think it's a very ingenious and very effective way of doing it. Plus, it has adjustable stairs so people can get down into the kayaks more easily. It probably may set some precedent. So now let's get to the impact of shellfish. While John Abadili focused his passion about whether our regulation deals with shellfish habitat or shellfish themselves, I don't really think that's an issue. I really interpreted, John, that Arlene was referring to shellfish habitat as something we regulated, but I don't think that's the factor here, because the shellfish is not, it's not a 10. There's not high volume of shellfish here. It's some, but not a lot. It's no more than under the other piers. I don't consider shellfish here to be a controlling factor. I think what is a controlling factor is the degree of the impact of the pier itself. I think it was Pete that said, is there a lesser degree of impact that we could get from a different structure? This is pretty minimal. It's the fact that it's permanent raises some issues, but once it's there, as George has said, I support his view. Once it's there, it's there. So I don't think there's enough evidence here to go one way or the other. But I think in this particular case, there is no great concern for impact. I'm not going to try to elaborate on the shellfish. I think that Pete and George have touched on that well enough. I think chapter 703, back to I think it's Martin was at 310 North Bay a few weeks ago. That was sort of our baptismal font filled with vinegar. This particular one is we dealt with turbidity there. We haven't even raised that issue here. We dealt with length and other issues that don't really apply. This one here, the only variance from 703 is centering. And the reasons for not centering it on this lot has been well explained. So the final point that I had was access to water. The old Scott Blazes thing, we all have a right to get to the water. Well, nobody's fighting getting to the water. The question is, by what means are we going to get there? So, and this proposes a 4-foot wide pier. So my feeling is that while no application is perfect, this one has addressed the issues that are completely associated with this particular area effectively enough that I'm not going to say we're remiss to deny it. That would be prejudging somebody else's vote. I don't intend to do that. But in this particular case, I think the weight of the evidence supports the application being approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Bill?
My greatest concern is access to shell fishing. Piers obstruct access in and around pilings and the cross braces under them. Our pier and dock bylaw 7031, right in the preamble, it says, the placement, length, and size of docks and appurtenant floats can interfere with the harvesting of quahogs, softshell clams, and scallops. And then at the end of that section, it says docks conforming to the following regulations can be presumed to minimize the aforementioned possible negative impacts, unquote. And then when you go into the regs under 703-5B, it says, and John Abadili already mentioned this, in most cases, seasonal piers present less impact to the resource because of their seasonal nature and because they can be constructed entirely with environmentally benign materials. And so when you end up having a seasonal dock, you're basically not having that effect on the shellfishing, the shellfish harvest. And so, at least half the year, you're not going to have that impact. As for the colonization of piles by invasive species and whatnot, I mean, that is a reality. And the document that Arlene, you provided, it makes it really clear that, piles are colonized by invasive species. And in fact, on the very first page, if I might, it just literally under the caption, it says, a fowling community dominated by sea squirts growing on a rope. Sea squirts are one of the most common fowling animals in Long Island Sound. They are very common on docks, pilings, and jetties. And then this article basically talks about, how do you say it? Didymnum, the species of carpet tunicates. But then in the context of talking about that, it says, unlike most other alien sea squirts, talking about non-didymnum, let me go again. Unlike most other alien sea squirts, which are typically restricted to living in shallow water, protected harbors and bays, and are only found attached to hard substrates, e.g. pilings, rocks, and soda cans, the new invader has the ability to grow on gravel and cobble bottoms in much deeper waters, blah, blah, about the carpet. So there again, it's suggesting that the sea squirts are on pilings. They do grow. You can have other, that we're referring to them as alien sea squirts, not necessarily didymnum. So, we don't know what the impact is, but they're definitely there. And then in that article that you sent, which I really appreciated that, and I hope you just keep on researching, Arlene. I'm enjoying this. It just makes clear that there's going to be research. It says there will be research on the impacts. This group in Connecticut, they're going to be looking at, what is the impact on soft shell clam and blah, blah, blah. So, there's more research. So, we don't know, but it seems like an issue. It's a legitimate issue. The next point is there is, in fact, a reduction in the habitat. You put in a bunch of pilings, and the pilings are X diameter, you are taking up more space. And so that is a loss. But again, finally, I just really think that the shellfish access to shell fishing is the primary, my primary concern. And if you have a seasonal dock, you're not going to have that issue half the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Louise?
I just wanted to mention a couple of things. We talked about the shellfish rankings going up at a particular site. I think over 3 different rankings, the ranking increased. And I just want to point out, you have to be careful about that, because the way the rankings are calculated, if you have, say, 5 judges and 3 of them give the area a 10, and 2 of them are clueless about this particular area, that 10 is averaged out over 5. So the best you can do, 3 10s is a 30, and you divide it by 5, you end up with a 6. So, you could get a 6 during one session, and then 3 years later, all 5 judges know of this particular area. And so all 5 give it a 10, and therefore you have 50 that you average over 5. Then the answer is 10. So, the area can stay the same, but depending on the knowledge of those 5 particular judges of that particular area, the number can go up. So, I don't know exactly what the process was for this particular situation, but you really have to be careful when you throw around those numbers, which is why we ask applicants to and natural resources to do an analysis at the time of the application. The other thing is, I'd like to kind of follow on to what Pete was talking about in terms of our consistency. Arlene, I think you, in doing your analysis of our database, you narrowed it down to 3 different applications, which were the most similar to the one we are considering now. Slivka in 2020, Butcher in 2021, and Cohen in 2021. We've already talked a lot about Cohen, but let me just say that that is a very different situation, a very different location than what we're talking about now. I mean, it's a very busy, narrow area that's got a boat ramp fairly close by. It has docks on either side, which this application has as well. It's basically at the entrance into the marinas and under the bridge. So that is a very different situation environmentally than the one that we're talking about today. Slivka at 231 Baxter's Neck Road, that was an application for adding tie-off piles on an already permanent dock. So this was kind of adding 2 piles, I believe. I didn't listen to the tape, but 2 piles, which is kind of a small change compared to what we're talking about in terms of completely changing the entire construction of the dock. And then finally, Butcher at 105 Eel River Road, Osterville. I believe this was a fairly old structure that went in before we had regulations. So one of the driving forces for allowing to rebuild and reconfigure into a permanent dock was that it would be a substantial change and would bring that dock into our regulations. And that was one of the reasons that we decided it was, you know, on balance, it was worth approving. So, you know, we consider these applications on a case-to-case basis, and I would contend that the 3 that you winnowed down as being most similar to the application that we're considering today are really very different from today's concerns. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. I think I just want to remind every commissioner that, you know, the 12-inch, maybe just go back to the basic ones. You know, the 12-inch and the 30-inch rule is basically for a motorized pier. Right now, you know, we are not talking about a motorized pier. This is a dinghy, non-motorized pier. And under the Chapter 703, I think we specifically mentioned that we prefer to have a seasonal when it becomes a non-motorized pier. And also we are looking at site specific. Each application is by its own judgment. And, you know, so we have to keep that in mind in terms of, you know, whether it should be a seasonal or it should be permanent. And a lot of times when they come into the seasonal ones, we often ask the questions, how much water do you really need to get access to that pier in terms of to have a non-motorized functions? And so those are the critical questions that we have to come through and look at. Any other questions? If not, I go to the public comment. 10:18, any public comment on this?
Yeah, Mr. Towns has his hand raised.
Yes. John?
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity of addressing the Conservation Commission tonight. And first off, let me say happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I would have had more. I would have had more of my fellow Barnstable Association for Recreational Shellfishing buddies here tonight, but some of them, for some of them, it's a date night. So anyway. So you'll have to just deal with me. But I am the president of BARS, and I'm a full-time resident of Katuitt. And I've been kayaking, shellfishing, fishing, and motorboating on the Cape here for the last 6 years. And I'm rather curious, the couple that have made this application, they're about my age, as I understand it. And they don't own a boat. They live in Boston, and it's a summer home. I get that. That's fine. But they were going to get kayaks, and I kayak, and I go to public ways of water around Barnstable and other areas, and virtually none of them have a dock. Kayakers don't need docks, and canoers don't need docks. You just get your boat to the water, you climb in, and off you go. And then you reverse that when you're coming back. So I just, the stress on having a dock put in, and especially a permanent one, is really confusing to me. It's almost as though, I just wonder why they would need a dock, and asking for a non-motorized boating dock. It's just strange to me, if you will, because it seems to me that they may live there for the next 10 years, but they may not. And who would the next owner of that property? Do you think that they would want to just do kayaking and canoeing? Or do you think that they are more apt to get a motorboat? I think I know the answer to that one myself. Whether or not it would be enforced, that would be sort of the Mr. Hoops area. But anyway, another thing I want to say, I've got a couple other points. Number one is the 3 bays are dying. They're absolutely dying. And it's not just from invasives. The invasives hang on to the docks. You can go over to the Wiano Marina, as I have. I took invasive species identification and monitoring training with Barnstable Clean Water Coalition over there. And they have tunicates. They've got barnacles. That's really not non-native, but things like skeletal shrimp and tunicates. And what happens? Okay, so they're there. They're hanging onto the dock. Do they live forever? No, they'll die and they'll fall to the bottom, and they'll die and they'll turn into muck if they're not eaten by a fish or a shrimp or some other mollusk. And then their nitrogen goes into the ground. And I've been in North Bay in particular, around Warren's Cove, and with the commercial shellfisher, and he stuck a pole, a PVC pipe, about a 6-foot pole over the side, and pushed it down into the muck, and he pulled it up, and it was covered with at least 4 feet of black sludge. And what it was the decaying mass of dead plants and animals that are out in the bay. And there are lots of holes or deeper parts of the bay bottom, if you will, and they're getting filled up with this muck. And that muck, as it fills up, it starts spreading out, and it's coming toward the shoreline. And it's an amazing thing. I've taken movies of this stuff, and I can unfortunately I wasn't able to share that with you tonight, but I think I would like to put some of that on a disc or whatever and give it to the Conservation Committee. But so that's one thing. Bars were particularly sensitive to the habitat. But the other thing is the public's right to access, and that's something that we really hold dear. And permanent docks are an obstruction, as Bill Hearn said, to the public's right of access for fishing, fouling, and navigation. And anyway, I'll wrap it up. You've heard enough from me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and but I do hope that this gets turned down. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Channel 18, any more public comment on this?
Seeing none.
None. Amy, do you want to say anything? Amy Koto.
Hi, Conservation Commission. Thank you for having me. Amy Croto, Shellfish Constable. I would just like to reiterate the opinions of my division, and that this is, it literally is just how many more things can we take away from our embayments in terms of habitat for the use of private entity. I understand that people have a right to apply for these, but I was born and raised in this town. I've been here since 1980, and I've seen nothing but degradation and loss of habitat, loss of fisheries, loss of shellfish. And I cannot say that any pier, whether seasonal or permanent, helps in that. So, we have our opinion that we're not in favor of this application. And that's where we stand on that.
Thank you, Amy. So what I want to do, Pete, one last comment.
Okay, yeah, actually, Mr. Towns had a pretty good comment. I do a lot of kayaking as well. I'm a little bit younger, well, maybe I'm not, but anyways, I frankly can't imagine. I couldn't balance getting into a kayak off of a dock. I get in kayaks from having in shallow water. I can put my feet on the ground. The kayak isn't going to tip over as I try to sit into it one way or another. If you're getting into a kayak, I mean, you ought to be doing it from land if you got, unless you're a tightrope walker. So I hadn't heard yet about a sailboat, and I'm not certain that that's really before us. This was for non-motorized craft, and I think a small sailboat or kayaks are very easy to launch from land. And yes, thank you.
Louise, you want to say something?
Yeah, quickly, I agree with Pete. I'm a kayaker and I never use a dock to get in. I don't know about sailboats, but for kayaking, it's dangerous. That's my input.
Thank you. So what I want to do though is just because I need to pull the commission which way I'm going here.
I'm sorry. Can I take just a minute and give a couple of quick responses to a few things that were said?
Okay, go ahead.
So the issue of whether a seasonal pier allows recovery in the off season, you guys spent an hour tonight talking about whether grass could recover from under a tent in the off season. This is not substantially different. The holes that are created by posts and by the jetting of posts do not allow for recovery. They fill with soft sediment. By the time a couple of years have passed, it's the same amount of habitat loss as from the 12-inch diameter pile that is there, and it has good sediment right up to the edge of it. The business about the soft-bodied fouling organisms being new science and therefore being applied just recently clearly isn't true. You applied it on the Ryan Pier in 2017, and then there's this big gap where it doesn't seem to matter anymore. The rapid assessment surveys indeed look at floats for ease of access, but they're also because they're different organisms that tend to grow on those surfaces than grow on piles. The floats are non-native materials. They're PVC, they're rubber, they're all kinds of plastic. Piles are wood. It's a native material. The Cohen Pier, you could easily have made the Cohen Pier a seasonal pier. It was a fresh project with nothing there to start with. You didn't do it. Again, there are different kinds of fouling organisms. The ones that impact shellfish the most are the ones that grow on the bottom, the carpet organisms. They tend to be different than the ones that grow on the piles. I agree with some of the comments that Louise made about the way the shellfish habitat maps are developed. Unfortunately, they are not developed on scientific data, but they are what they are, and you use them all the time. So I think it's fair game to do that. I would suggest that maybe somebody should ask John and Louise what grows on the piles on their piers. I suspect it's mostly barnacles and maybe a few borers. But it would be interesting to know if any of these soft-bodied organisms grow in quantity or at all on their piers. And I do not believe that your regulations say that where there is no motorboat involved at a pier, that it should always be a seasonal operation rather than permanent. And in terms of whether somebody needs a dock, that's not the question. It's like, does somebody need a 3-car garage or a 4-car garage? No, probably nobody needs a garage at all if you don't care about shoveling snow in the winter. But the issue is impact, and whether the impacts from these piers are allowable under the regulations. So thank you for the additional comment.
One last word, John.
Yeah, it's been a long night. Arlene, in answer to your question, I'm afraid I've looked at the end of my dock and I would not know invasive species. I plead ignorance on that. But also as a kayaker, I always launch from the shore, never from the dock, because when I'm a lot older than Peter, it's the only way I can get in without killing myself. I do know that under our regulations, there is a stated preference for seasonal docks. I know the biologists in town have always recommended seasonal over permanent. I look at, somebody said this, the intended use of this by the applicant, and is there a lease or a lower potentially negative environmental impact alternative? I really believe that the seasonal dock for recreational purposes, et cetera, is a significantly less environmentally negative impact and could still be used by this homeowner if that's what they choose versus using it from shore. So let's move on, Thomas.
So what I want to do though is to pull the commission on approving this project as a permanent pier. George?
Abadili.
I would support a seasonal pier. I would not support a permanent pier in this location.
Foster.
I would support a seasonal pier, not a permanent pier at this location.
Gilmore, I would support a permanent pier. Vern.
Bill, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, I would support a seasonal pier and not a permanent.
Lee,
I support a seasonal pier and not permanent.
Moran,
Permanent.
Zampu,
I would support no pier, but if I got to have a pier, it'd be seasonal. I want to make something very clear for the record. Given the tens to hundred of non-native species that are likely in the waters of coastal Massachusetts, only a small minority of them are actually soft-bodied tunicates. So we shouldn't be concentrating just on tunicates. There are other species that could have effect. I don't know, but thank you for that clarification and your requesting of my leaning.
so we have 5 seasonal, 2 permanent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, George. Could I make a motion to take this under the advisement and come back on February the 28th for the final vote?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Moran,
I'm going to abstain. You've got a 21-day rule issue hanging here.
No, I don't think that's right, Larry. I think Arlene, correct me if I'm wrong, you've agreed to a continuance on this, have you not? Specific dates?
You would have enough time if you could write the thing up relatively quickly after that meeting.
Tom, just verify that.
Yes.
Larry, would you like to change your vote?
Yeah, I go along with it. Yeah.
Okay. Zampu,
Aye.
that's unanimous.
Thank you. We have 11 certificates.
Excuse me, Tom. Is there
Yeah.
going to be a proposed findings on this or not?
Yes.
I'm gonna draft up some findings for the 28th.
Okay, we got to have them well in advance of that to review them. We can't have them the day of the hearing. We got to have them the weekend before. Period.
Well, let's see. I'll take a look. We have 11 certificates of compliance. 9 of them is with the assembling required LLC, SE3-5011, SE3-5474, SE3-5480, SE3-5481, SE3-5581, SE3-5585, SE3-5694, SE3-5710, and SE3-5717. And then we have Perry and Sheila Vet, SE3-5779, Matthew Berry, SE3-5839. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Zampu,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Hearn,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Foster,
Aye.
Abadili,
Aye.
that's unanimous.
We have 2 sets of minutes, January the 10th and January the 31st.
I make the motion, we accept the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Hearn,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Zampu,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. That's unanimous.
Our next meeting is 6:30 on February the 28th. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Abadili,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hearn,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Moran,
Aye.
Zampu.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 9:24, Mr. Chairman.